50 Black Celebrities with the Most Tragic Deaths, Part 2. What if I told you some of the greatest black icons in history didn't just die? They were taken by hate, by silence, by betrayal, and by a world that refused to protect them. These aren't just sad headlines. They're final moments that changed black history forever, leaving scars that still ache today. Welcome back to Legends of Black Excellence, where we honor the truth behind the legacy. Stay with us until the end, because one of these stories will hit you like a punch to the chest. And before we begin, hit like, subscribe, and comment which loss still feels personal to you. Jam Master Jay. Jam Master Jay wasn't just a name in hip-hop history, he was a foundation. Born Jason Mizell on January 21, 1965 in Queens, New York, he became the heartbeat of Run DMC, the group that helped drag rap out of the streets and onto the world stage. With his sharp DJ cuts and fearless energy, Jay stood behind classics like It's Tricky My Adidas and Walk This Way, the 1986 collaboration with Aerosmith that shattered barriers and introduced hip-hop to mainstream America. By the mid-1980s, Run DMC wasn't just successful, they were historic, becoming the first rap group to earn major rock radio play and one of the first to achieve multi-platinum impact in an era when hip-hop was still treated like a passing trend. Jam Master Jay carried that momentum with a businessman's mind, too, founding Jam Master Jay Records and pushing to create space for the next generation. But behind the legacy was a man walking a tightrope between fame, loyalty, and street reality. Even as hip-hop became a billion-dollar industry, Jay stayed deeply rooted in his neighborhood. The kind of person who still moved like a regular guy, still trusted familiar faces, still believed respect could protect him. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, he worked to mentor younger artists and stay active in music, even when Run DMC's peak era had passed. Yet the closer he stayed to the ground, the more exposed he was to the same dangers that fame can't erase. And here's the question: when the world knows your name, does that make you safer, or does it make you a bigger target? Then came the moment that still feels like a nightmare. On October 30th, 2002, Jam Master Jay was shot and killed inside a recording studio in Queens at only 37 years old. The attack was sudden and brutal, the kind of loss that instantly freezes time for a whole culture. Fans mourned not only a pioneer but a symbol of hip-hop's innocence before the industry became darker and deadlier. For years, the case haunted the community, and even as legal developments unfolded later, nothing could restore what was stolen that night, a living legend who should have grown old and been celebrated while he was still here. Jam Master Jay's death remains one of hip-hop's most tragic endings, not because of how famous he was, but because of how preventable it felt. Pop Smoke. Pop Smoke didn't ease into hip-hop. He detonated. Born Bashar Baraka Jackson on July 20th, 1999 in Brooklyn, New York, he emerged as the face of Brooklyn drill with a voice that sounded twice his age, deep, gravelly, and impossible to ignore. In 2019, his breakout single Welcome to the Party turned local energy into a national wave, and tracks like Dior confirmed he wasn't a viral fluke. Pop Smoke carried a rare mix of street intensity and superstar magnetism, pairing menace with melody in a way that made clubs shake and radios pay attention. Labels circled major artists co-signed, and his rise felt inevitable, the kind of momentum you only see once in a generation. But the speed of his success came with dangers that didn't care how young he was. At just 20, Pop was adjusting to fame in real time, moving between studio sessions, photo shoots, and high-pressure expectations while still learning how exposed a star can become. In early 2020, he traveled to Los Angeles for work and downtime, staying at a rented Hollywood Hills home. In an era where attention spreads instantly, even small lapses in privacy can turn deadly. The same internet that builds a superstar can also become a map for the wrong people, and Pop's growing visibility made him vulnerable in ways no hit record could shield. On the night of February 19, 2020, everything ended. Pop Smoke was shot during a home invasion in Los Angeles and later died from his injuries, a brutal conclusion that stunned hip-hop and the wider culture. The loss felt especially cruel because his story was still being written, the debut album he never lived, to fully celebrate the tours he hadn't headlined yet, the movies he was beginning to step into. Months later, Shoot for the Stars. Aim for the Moon was released posthumously and became a major success, cementing what fans already believed he had: the sound, the presence, and the ceiling of a global icon. Pop Smoke's death remains one of modern music's most tragic endings, not only because of violence, but because the future he represented disappeared in an instant. A voice meant to grow louder was suddenly gone. Young Dolph. Young Dolph didn't just rap about independence, he lived it with a stubborn pride that made him one of the most respected self-made figures in modern Southern hip-hop. Born Adolph Robert Thornton Jr. on July 27, 1985 in Chicago, and raised in Memphis, he built his career outside the traditional industry machine, turning raw street stories into a business blueprint. Dolph founded Paper Route Empire and became known for a grind-it-yourself mentality that resonated with fans who admired hustle over hype. Mixtapes like High-Class Street Music helped establish his voice, while albums such as Rich Slave and Bulletproof pushed him into the mainstream without him ever surrendering control. His music carried swagger, humor, and survival at once, and in Memphis he wasn't just an artist, he was a symbol that ownership could still win. Behind the flashy success, Dolph's life was shaped by a constant awareness of danger. He had survived past shooting incidents and knew the cost of moving with fame in environments where old conflicts can follow you. Yet he still invested in his city and kept close ties to the place that raised him. He supported community efforts, gave back to families during the holidays, and embraced the role of local hero even as his profile grew nationwide. That closeness was part of his authenticity, but it also meant he was never fully removed from risk. Dolph's story sat at the tense crossroads of triumph and vulnerability, a man who overcame the odds yet never escaped the reality that the streets don't always forgive success. On November 17, 2021, that reality turned deadly. Young Dolph was shot and killed in Memphis while visiting Makeda's Homemade Butter Cookies, a neighborhood business he had reportedly frequented and supported. He was 36 years old. The news tore through hip-hop like a shockwave, not just because another rapper had been lost, but because Dolph represented something bigger than music. He was proof that you could build an empire without begging for validation, that you could bet on yourself and actually win. His death left a void in Memphis and sparked an outpouring of grief from fans who saw him as a hometown champion. Even after he was gone, his legacy remained tied to independence, loyalty, and ownership, the very principles he stood on until the end. Young Dolph's tragic death wasn't just the fall of an artist. It was the silencing of a blueprint many hoped would protect the next generation. Takeoff Migos. Takeoff was the quiet engine inside one of hip-hop's biggest machines. Born Kershnik Karibal on June 18, 1994 in Lawrenceville, Georgia, he rose to fame as the youngest member of Migos, the chart-dominating trio that reshaped the sound of modern rap. While Quavo carried the hooks and Offset delivered punchy attitude, Takeoff often supplied the sharpest flows, precise, technical, and effortlessly cool. Migos broke through with Versace in 2013, then turned their signature triplet cadence into a global language across hits like Bad and Bougie T-Shirt and Stir Fry. Their 2017 album Culture became a cultural event, and Takeoff's talent helped carry that momentum even when he avoided the spotlight. Offstage, Takeoff was known for being low-key focused and drama-free, an artist who seemed more comfortable in the studio than in headlines. That contrast made him stand out in a world where controversy often fuels attention. He wasn't chasing clout, he was building craft. In late 2022, fans were watching Migos navigate personal and professional turbulence, and Takeoff's presence felt like stability. There was still a sense that time would smooth everything out, that more music, more tours, and a fresh chapter were coming. But in the background of fame, one truth stays brutal. Even the calmest stars can be caught in the chaos surrounding them. On November 1st, 2022, everything ended in a moment that still feels unreal. Takeoff was fatally shot in Houston, Texas after an altercation outside a bowling alley, and he was pronounced dead at just 28 years old. The shock wasn't only about violence, it was about who it happened to. Takeoff wasn't known for wild behavior or reckless headlines, which made his death feel especially senseless. Tributes poured in from across the music world, and fans replayed his verses with a new heaviness, realizing how much he contributed without demanding attention. His passing left Migos permanently changed, and reminded the culture that the line between celebration and tragedy can be razor thin. Takeoff's death remains one of the most heartbreaking losses of this era, because it stole a gifted artist at his peak, one who seemed built for longevity, not an early ending. King Von. King Von didn't come into rap as a manufactured star. He arrived as a storyteller with scars in his voice. Born Davon Daquan Bennett on August 9, 1994 in Chicago, he grew up surrounded by violence, loss, and instability experiences that later became the fuel for his music. Von first gained wider attention through his connection to fellow Chicago rapper Lil Durk, signing to Only the Family OTF, and quickly separating himself with a unique gift. He could rap like he was narrating a movie. Songs such as Crazy Story and Took Her to the O weren't just street records. They were vivid chapters filled with tension, emotion, and character. By 2019 and 2020, Von was climbing fast, releasing projects like Grandson Vol. 1 and Welcome to O Block, building a fan base that believed he was on the verge of becoming one of rap's dominant voices. But Von's rise carried the weight of his environment, and fame didn't erase the dangers around him, it amplified them. He had the spotlight, money, and momentum, yet the street conflicts that shaped his identity still hovered close like unfinished business, following him from city to city. His music often reflected a world where survival was never guaranteed, where loyalty was everything, and where one moment could change a life forever. Even as he gained industry respect, his image remained tied to a reality many listeners could only imagine. Von wasn't just rapping about danger, he was walking beside it, and that made his success feel both powerful and fragile at the same time. Then the worst outcome became real. In the early hours of November 6, 2020, King Von was shot outside a nightclub in Atlanta, Georgia, after an altercation that escalated into gunfire. He was rushed to the hospital but died at the age of 26. The news spread instantly, shocking fans who had watched him rise so quickly and believed his best years were still ahead. His death didn't just end a career, it froze a story mid-sentence, cutting off an artist who had finally found a way to turn pain into purpose. In the aftermath, his music surged as listeners replayed his lyrics with new meaning, hearing prophecy in lines that once sounded like entertainment. King Von's death remains one of the most tragic losses in modern hip-hop because it felt like the inevitable ending to a life he was trying to outgrow, and a reminder that sometimes success arrives but safety never follows. XXXTentacion. XXXTentacion was one of the most polarizing and emotionally raw artists of his generation, a young star who turned inner chaos into music that millions couldn't stop playing. Born José Dwayne Ricardo Onfroy on January 23, 1998 in Florida, he rose from the internet underground with a sound that didn't fit neatly into any box. His songs blended rap, rock, and haunting melodies, switching from rage to heartbreak in the span of a minute. Tracks like Look at Me made him explode in 2017, while Jocelyn Flores and Sad revealed the pain beneath the anger, connecting with fans who felt unheard and broken. By the time his album hit #1 on the Billboard 200, XXXTentacion had become more than an artist, he was a cultural storm. But his rise was tangled with controversy, legal problems, and a reputation that sparked constant debate. Even as his fan base grew into a worldwide movement, his personal life and public allegations followed him like a shadow, making him one of the most complicated figures in modern music. Still in his final months, many supporters believed he was trying to change direction, speaking more about growth, mental health, and redemption. His influence wasn't just about songs, it was about emotion at full volume, a generation learning to cope in public. And that's what made his story so intense. He was barely out of his teens yet, already carrying the weight of fame, judgment, and expectations that crush grown men. Then everything ended in the most sudden way imaginable. On June 18, 2018, XXXTentacion was shot and killed in Deerfield Beach, Florida during a robbery after leaving a motorcycle dealership. He was only 20 years old. The world froze as the footage and headlines spread and fans struggled to process how quickly a superstar could be erased. His death turned his music into a memorial overnight, and it left behind unanswered questions about what his adulthood could have become if he'd been given the time. Whether people loved him, criticized him, or felt conflicted about him, his passing remains one of the most tragic losses of the streaming era, because it wasn't just the death of a rapper. It was the collapse of a future that had barely started and the end of a voice that had already changed the sound of youth culture. Proof D12. Proof was the heart of Detroit hip-hop, not just a rapper but a connector who helped build a whole movement before the world truly understood what the city had created. Born Deshaun Dupree Holton on October 2, 1973, Proof grew up in Detroit's tough landscape and turned that raw environment into music with hunger, humor, and pride. He became a founding member of D12, the chaotic, talented crew that helped push Detroit rap into the national spotlight alongside Eminem. When D12 exploded with albums like Devil's Night and hits like Purple Pills, Proof stood out as the group's anchor, fearless on the mic, quick with punchlines, but also respected as the big brother who kept the energy together. Outside the spotlight, he was known in the city as a mentor and a leader, the type of artist who wanted the whole team to eat. But fame didn't erase the pressure Proof carried. He was balancing the expectations of a rising empire while still living close to the same streets that raised him. Detroit loved him because he never pretended to be someone else, yet that authenticity came with risk. Nightlife, old relationships, and the unpredictable mix of ego and alcohol could turn any situation into chaos. Proof had spoken openly about personal struggles, and those who knew him understood he wasn't just performing intensity, he was wrestling with real life in real time. Even as he tried to mature and grow beyond the drama, the environment around him could still pull him back toward danger when it mattered most. That danger turned fatal in the early hours of April 11, 2006. Proof was shot and killed at a nightclub in Detroit after a confrontation escalated into violence. He was only 32 years old. The loss hit Detroit like an earthquake because Proof wasn't just an artist, he was a pillar of the scene, a man who helped open doors for others and gave the city its swagger on a national stage. Eminem's grief was public, but in Detroit, the mourning was personal. Fans couldn't believe someone so central to the culture could be gone in a single night. Proof's death remains one of hip-hop's most painful tragedies because it wasn't a slow fade or a natural ending. It was sudden, violent, and final. A voice that carried Detroit pride was silenced, leaving behind music memories and a warning about how quickly the night can change everything. MO3. MO3 carried the kind of pain in his voice that couldn't be faked. Born Melvin Abdul Noble Jr. on May 31, 1992 in Dallas, Texas, he rose from hardship into regional stardom by blending Southern rap with raw emotional melodies. Unlike many street artists who hid behind bravado, MO3 sounded vulnerable and fearless, at the same time singing and rapping about heartbreak, loyalty, paranoia, and survival with an honesty that made listeners feel like they were hearing someone's real diary. Songs like Everybody and Outside turned him into a powerful voice in Texas, and as his numbers grew, so did the belief that he could break nationally. He wasn't polished like a pop star, he was real, and that authenticity became his brand. But Mo3's rise happened under constant tension. Dallas rap politics, personal conflicts, and the pressures of being visible in a city where grudges don't disappear created a dangerous backdrop. He was building a career while still navigating the same environment that had shaped his music, and that environment doesn't always allow second chances. Even as he kept recording and expanding his audience, there was an edge in his story, like he knew trouble could appear at any moment. Mo3 often spoke about betrayal and violence in ways that didn't feel like entertainment, but like a warning. When an artist's pain feels that close to the surface, fans can't help but wonder how long they'll be allowed to survive the life they're describing. Then, tragedy struck in broad daylight. On November 11, 2020, Mo3 was shot and killed on Interstate 35 in Dallas in an attack that shocked Texas and spread quickly through the hip-hop world. He was only 28 years old. Reports described a chaotic scene as he was pursued and then fatally wounded, turning a regular highway into a crime scene and a symbol of how exposed a young star can be. His death sparked an outpouring of grief because Mo3 wasn't just another rapper. He was a voice people leaned on, someone whose music helped listeners process their own trauma. After his passing, his songs hit differently, sounding less like stories and more like unfinished messages. Mo3's death remains one of the most tragic losses of this era because he was on the cusp of crossing over, building momentum and rewriting his future. Instead, the streets took him back in a moment, and a rising talent became a memorial far too soon. Pimp C. Pimp C was more than a rapper. He was the soulful heartbeat of Southern hip-hop, a man whose voice carried swagger, humor, and the weight of the streets all at once. Born Chad Lamont Butler on December 29, 1973 in Port Arthur, Texas, he rose to fame as one half of UGK Underground Kings alongside Bun B. Together, they helped define the sound of the South long before mainstream radio fully respected it. Pimp C's production style was rich and melodic, soaked in funk, while his lyrics mixed blunt honesty with flashy confidence. UGK classics like Pocket Full of Stones and the landmark album Ridin' Dirty made them regional royalty, and later their influence went national through collaborations such as Big Pimpin' with Jay-Z, which introduced their Texas flavor to an even bigger audience. But behind the shine was a complicated struggle. Pimp C's career included legal trouble and time away from music, and when he returned, fans celebrated him like a hero who had made it back from the shadows. In 2007, UGK's album Underground Kings debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, proving their power wasn't just nostalgia, it was real dominance. Pimp C sounded reinvigorated, outspoken, and determined to protect Southern hip-hop's identity from being watered down. Yet the pressures of success, health challenges, and the lifestyle surrounding the industry can quietly build into something lethal. Even when a man looks unstoppable, the body keeps its own score. Then came the loss that stunned the culture. On December 4th, 2007, Pimp C was found dead in a hotel room in Los Angeles at only 33 years old. His death was ruled an accident, with reports pointing to the effects of sleep apnea, combined with other factors, a tragic ending that felt sudden and unreal. News spread fast across the South, and the grief was immediate, because Pimp wasn't just an artist. He was a voice of regional pride, a symbol that Texas had something the world needed to hear. In death, he became even more legendary as younger rappers continued to sample his style, quote his lines, and treat his name like a badge of authenticity. Pimp C's story remains one of hip-hop's most painful tragedies because it came right after a major comeback, right when it looked like his second chapter would be even bigger than the first. Instead, the South lost a king in the middle of his reign. Soulja Slim. Soulja Slim was one of the rawest voices New Orleans ever produced, a rapper who sounded like the city's heat, hunger, and heartbreak all poured into a microphone. Born James Tapp Jr. on September 4, 1977, he grew up in the Magnolia Projects, a place where survival wasn't a mindset, but a daily requirement. Slim's music carried that reality with unapologetic detail, earning him a reputation as a street poet who didn't soften the truth for anyone. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, as Southern rap gained national attention, Slim became one of the most recognizable voices of Louisiana hip-hop. He wasn't just another regional act, he was a symbol of New Orleans grit, delivering verses that felt like crime reports, confessionals, and victory speeches all at once. His biggest moment on the national stage came when he appeared on Juvenile's hit single Slow Motion, a song that surged to the top of the charts and introduced Slim to a massive audience. The track became a defining anthem of the early 2000s, and Slim's presence on it felt like a breakthrough proof that New Orleans artists could dominate mainstream radio without changing their identity. But even as success knocked on the door, Slim's life carried the dangers of the environment that shaped him. Fame didn't erase old conflicts, and street politics don't disappear just because the music is selling. Slim's story was always balanced on a thin edge, one step away from elevation and one step away from tragedy. That tragedy came brutally fast. On November 26, 2003, Soulja Slim was shot multiple times in New Orleans and later died at the hospital. He was only 26 years old. The news hit like a thunderclap in the South because Slim was still rising, still building, and still proving himself to a wider audience. His death wasn't just the loss of a rapper. It was the loss of another young black talent who never got the chance to outlive the dangers that surrounded him. In the years after his passing, his music became even more revered in Louisiana, and his name turned into a legend whispered with respect. Soulja Slim's story remains one of hip-hop's most tragic endings because it felt like a future stolen in real time, a man who had finally reached the level he'd fought for, only to be taken before he could truly enjoy it. The city kept his memory alive, but the silence he left behind still echoes. Eazy-E. Eazy-E didn't just help shape hip-hop, he helped detonate it. Born Eric Lynn Wright on September 7, 1964 in Compton, California, he rose from the streets into music history as a founding member of NWA, the group that forced America to confront the realities of policing poverty and survival through raw, unapologetic storytelling. With albums like Straight Outta Compton 1988, Eazy became one of rap's most recognizable voices, delivering lines with a sharp, fearless attitude that felt like a warning and a rallying cry at the same time. He wasn't the most technical rapper, but his presence was undeniable, a street prophet with charisma, danger, and authenticity. Beyond the mic, Eazy was a businessman too, creating Ruthless Records, which launched careers and turned West Coast rap into a powerhouse. But his rise came with pressure, conflict, and a lifestyle that moved fast and hard. The early 1990s brought internal division, industry battles, and public feuds that became legendary, including the fallout with former NWA members after Dr. Dre left Ruthless. Still, Eazy kept pushing forward, releasing music and trying to evolve beyond the chaos that surrounded the group's peak years. To fans, he looked unstoppable. A man who had survived the streets, survived controversy, and built an empire in a genre that was still fighting for legitimacy. That's what made what happened next so shocking. It wasn't gunfire or a car crash. It was something quieter, faster, and terrifyingly final. In early 1995, Eazy-E's health began to collapse suddenly. He was admitted to the hospital and diagnosed with AIDS, and the news hit the world like an earthquake. On March 26, 1995, he died at just 30 years old, only weeks after his diagnosis became public. The speed of his decline stunned fans and fellow artists who had never imagined a larger-than-life figure could be taken so quickly. In his final days, Eazy reportedly addressed his loved ones and the public with messages of warning and reflection, turning his death into a moment that forced conversations many people were still afraid to have. His passing remains one of the most tragic in hip-hop history because it felt sudden, unfinished, and almost unreal. The architect of West Coast rap gone before the genre he helped build even reached its full peak. Eazy-E left behind a legacy of revolution, controversy, and cultural impact that still shapes music today. But his death remains a painful reminder that not all tragedies announce themselves with noise. Some arrive silently and they don't give you time to say goodbye. Old Dirty Bastard ODB. Old Dirty Bastard was never meant to be ordinary, and that was both his gift and his curse. Born Russell Tyrone Jones on November 15, 1968 in Brooklyn, New York, he exploded onto the scene as one of the founding members of the Wu-Tang Clan, the legendary group that reshaped hip-hop in the early 1990s. While Wu-Tang's sound was gritty and cinematic, ODB was pure chaos and charisma. His voice was wild, his delivery unpredictable, and his personality so loud it felt like he couldn't fit inside the music industry's rules. On classic albums like Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers, he became the unpredictable spark that made the whole machine feel dangerous and alive. When he went solo with Return to the 36 Chambers, the dirty version, he proved his madness had magic, creating songs like Shimmy Shimmy Ya that became unforgettable pieces of hip-hop history. But behind the cult icon image was a man collapsing under the weight of addiction, legal trouble, and instability. ODB's public life became a never-ending cycle of arrests, missed court dates, probation issues, and bizarre headline moments that blurred the line between entertainment and tragedy. He could be hilarious one second and heartbreaking the next, a reminder of how quickly genius can turn into self-destruction when surrounded by the wrong influences and no safety net. Even as fans celebrated his unpredictable energy, the warning signs were everywhere: health scares, substance abuse struggles, and the kind of behavior that often signals a deeper battle happening off-camera. He was famous, but he wasn't protected, and the system that profits off wildness rarely stops to ask whether the person is okay. Then came the ending no one wanted but many feared. On November 13, 2004, Old Dirty Bastard collapsed at a recording studio in New York and was pronounced dead. He was only 35 years old. The loss hit hip-hop like a shockwave, because ODB wasn't just another rapper. He was an era, a personality so singular that there could never be a replacement. His death cemented him as a legend, but it also exposed the brutal cost of untreated addiction and a life spiraling in the public eye. Fans replayed his music with a new sadness, hearing pain behind the jokes and instability behind the outrageous moments. Old Dirty Bastard's tragic death remains one of hip-hop's most haunting reminders that fame can magnify everything, the talent, the chaos, and the damage, until there's nothing left but silence. Rick James. Rick James lived like a spotlight that refused to dim, bold, unpredictable, brilliant, and dangerous to underestimate. Born James Ambrose Johnson Jr. on February 1, 1948 in Buffalo, New York, he rose to fame as one of funk's most electrifying innovators, blending street attitude with rock energy and dance floor genius. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, he became a cultural force with hits like Super Freak, Give It To Me Baby, and Mary Jane. His music wasn't just popular, it shaped the sound of an era influencing pop, hip-hop, and R&B for decades to come. Rick didn't perform like a typical singer. He commanded crowds like a wild prophet of pleasure, turning concerts into full-body experiences. Behind the scenes, he was also a producer and mentor, helping launch the careers of artists like Teena Marie, proving he had vision beyond his own stardom. But Rick's life was as intense offstage as it was onstage, and the same energy that made him legendary also pulled him towards self-destruction. The pressures of fame, constant touring, and the lure of excess collided with addiction and legal trouble. By the 1990s, his public image shifted from untouchable funk king to troubled headline figure, especially after a series of criminal cases that damaged his career and reputation. Even when he tried to rebuild, the aftermath of heavy drug use and health complications followed him. His body began to pay for years of high living, and those close to him knew the party had a price. Yet Rick still carried a stubborn fire, occasionally stepping back into the spotlight with moments that reminded fans how powerful he once was and could still be. Then came the quiet ending that contrasted with his loud legend. On August 6, 2004, Rick James was found dead at his home in Los Angeles. He was 56 years old. Reports connected his death to heart and respiratory issues, with years of substance abuse widely acknowledged as part of the long-term damage to his health. The news felt surreal because Rick seemed like the kind of star who couldn't fade, only explode. Instead, he slipped away, leaving behind an unforgettable catalog and a complicated legacy that mixed genius chaos and caution. Rick James's death remains tragic not only because of what was lost, but because fans could see the arc a man with world-shaping talent pulled into a storm he couldn't fully escape. His music still makes people dance, but underneath the groove is a reminder that fame can amplify freedom and destruction in the same breath. Curtis Mayfield. Curtis Mayfield wasn't just a musician. He was a conscience with a melody, a man whose voice carried the truth of an entire generation. Born June 3, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois, Mayfield rose to fame in the 1960s as the leader of the Impressions, delivering uplifting anthems like People Get Ready that became intertwined with the civil rights movement. His falsetto was gentle, but his message was fearless. As a solo artist, he pushed even further, creating socially charged masterpieces like Move On Up and the iconic Superfly soundtrack, which didn't glorify street life, it exposed it. Curtis had a rare ability to blend beauty with warning, making music that could soothe you while also forcing you to look at the world clearly. He wasn't chasing trends, he was documenting America in real time. But the most tragic turn in his story wasn't scandal or sudden violence, it was a cruel accident that stole his physical freedom. In August 1990, while performing outdoors in Brooklyn, New York, a lighting rig collapsed and struck him, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down. In a moment, the man who had spent his life standing tall on stage was forced into a different kind of fight-survival dignity and endurance. Many would have disappeared from the public eye, but Curtis refused to let tragedy erase his voice. From his wheelchair, he continued recording using assisted methods to lay down vocals and craft music, even when his body couldn't follow his mind. His perseverance became legendary not because he pretended everything was fine, but because he kept creating through pain that most people couldn't imagine. Curtis Mayfield died on December 26, 1999, at 57 years old, after years of complications following his paralysis and declining health. His passing felt like losing a library of wisdom, a man who gave the world both sound and guidance. Fans mourned not only his death, but the unfairness of the path that led there, an icon whose life was changed by an accident in the middle of doing what he loved. Curtis Mayfield's story remains one of music's most tragic because it shows how quickly everything can shift and how hard it is to keep going when the stage lights turn into shadows. Yet even in tragedy, his legacy shines. His songs still feel like medicine, his lyrics still feel like prophecy, and his courage still stands as proof that real greatness isn't only in the spotlight, it's in what you do after the world tries to break you. Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday didn't just sing, she bled the truth into every note. Born Eleanora Fagan on April 7, 1915 in Philadelphia, she rose from poverty and trauma into becoming one of the most influential vocalists in American history. With a voice that wasn't built on power, but on emotion, Billie could make joy sound haunted and heartbreak sound elegant. By the 1930s and 1940s, she became a jazz superstar, recording timeless songs like God Bless the Child, Lover Man, and All of Me. But her most courageous moment came with Strange Fruit, the chilling anti-lynching song that turned her artistry into protest. At a time when speaking too loudly could get a black woman destroyed, Billie still stepped on stage and forced audiences to listen. She wasn't just entertaining people, she was confronting America. Yet Billie's fame came with a brutal price. Behind the spotlight was a life shaped by racism, exploitation, abusive relationships, and addiction. She was often underpaid, mistreated by managers, and denied basic dignity, even while being praised as a genius. As her career grew, so did the scrutiny. Her struggles with drugs and alcohol became both an escape and a trap, and the system seemed eager to punish her more than protect her. She endured repeated arrests, and many historians have pointed to how aggressively law enforcement targeted her, especially after she performed songs that made powerful people uncomfortable. Even as her voice grew raspier with age and pain, Billie continued to perform, trying to hold on to control of her life in an industry that rarely offered her mercy. By 1959, her health was collapsing. On July 17, 1959, Billie Holiday died in New York City at just 44 years old. The final chapter of her life was marked by illness, suffering, and heartbreaking controversy, including reports that she was under police watch even while hospitalized. Her death stunned the music world, but it also felt like the tragic ending to a life that had been pushed to the edge for too long. Billie Holiday's story remains one of the most tragic deaths in Black entertainment history, because it wasn't just one tragedy. It was a lifetime of them stacked together until her body couldn't carry it anymore. And yet her legacy refuses to die. Her phrasing still influences singers across every genre. Her courage still echoes in protest music, and her voice still sounds like a warning. Talent can make you famous, but it can't always make you safe. Dinah Washington. Dinah Washington had the kind of voice that could switch masks in seconds. Velvet one moment, fire the next. Born Ruth Lee Jones on August 29, 1924 in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and raised in Chicago, she grew from gospel roots into becoming one of the most versatile vocalists of the 20th century. She wasn't limited to one sound. Dinah could deliver jazz with elegance, blues with grit, pop with polish, and R&B with raw emotion. By the 1950s, she was a star, earning the nickname Queen of the Blues, and carving out hits like What a Difference a Day Makes, which won her a Grammy Award. Her success was historic for a Black woman in an era that tried to confine artists like her to the sidelines. Dinah didn't just perform, she commanded stages, radio, and respect. But behind the glamour was a life filled with instability and pressure. Dinah was known for her intense personality and a personal life that seemed to move as fast as her career, including multiple marriages and constant conflict in her inner circle. She worked relentlessly, touring and recording at a punishing pace, and like many stars of the era, she was surrounded by an industry that offered money and fame, but very little protection. The culture around nightlife and non-stop performing could easily pull an artist into exhaustion, dependency, and chaos. Dinah's image was powerful, but the private cost of maintaining that power was heavy. The deeper she rose into stardom, the more fragile her life behind the scenes appeared, a warning sign that success doesn't always equal safety. Then came the tragedy that shocked the music world. On December 14, 1963, Dinah Washington was found dead in Detroit, Michigan at only 39 years old. Her death was ruled an accidental overdose involving prescription drugs and alcohol, a heartbreaking end for a woman whose talent still felt like it was expanding. Fans were left stunned because Dinah wasn't fading away. She was still a major name, still capable of filling rooms with nothing but a microphone and a look. Her death remains one of the most tragic losses in Black music history, because it reflects a painful pattern: artists giving everything to entertain the world while quietly losing themselves in the process. Dinah Washington left behind a catalog that still defines vocal excellence, influencing singers across jazz, soul, and pop. But her ending remains a reminder that the industry has always been skilled at celebrating talent, while ignoring the dangers circling the people who create it. Tammy Terrell. Tammy Terrell's story is one of the most heartbreaking, what could have been tragedies in soul music history. Born Thomasina Winifred Montgomery on April 29, 1945 in Philadelphia, she was a natural performer from childhood, winning talent contests and stepping onto stages while most kids her age were still dreaming. By her teens, Tammy was already recording and touring, and her beauty, energy, and warm voice made it clear she had star power. When she signed with Motown, everything changed. She didn't just fit the label's polished sound, she elevated it. Tammy had a glow that felt effortless, the kind of artist who could charm a crowd without forcing a single note. Her most iconic chapter began when Motown paired her with Marvin Gaye. Their duets became some of the greatest love songs ever recorded, including Ain't No Mountain High Enough, You're All I Need to Get By, and Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing. Their chemistry sounded timeless, a perfect balance of tenderness and fire, and audiences believed they were witnessing the birth of Motown's next unstoppable superstar. But behind the scenes, Tammy was fighting something far more terrifying than stage nerves. In 1967, she collapsed while performing, and what initially seemed like exhaustion became a nightmare diagnosis, a brain tumor. From that moment, her life turned into a cycle of hospital rooms, surgeries, and relentless pain. Tammy Terrell died on March 16, 1970, at just 24 years old. Her death devastated Motown, shattered fans, and left a permanent scar on Marvin Gaye, who reportedly struggled to perform their songs afterward because the loss was too deep. The tragedy of Tammy's passing isn't only that she died young, it's that she was taken while her career was still ascending, while her voice was still growing, while her future felt limitless. She left behind recordings that continue to define romance in soul music, but her story remains one of the cruelest reminders that talent and innocence don't protect you from fate. Tammy Terrell should have had decades of music tours and triumphs. Instead, she became a symbol of beauty and brilliance, interrupted a shining light that went out before the world was ready to let her go. Florence Ballard, The Supremes. Florence Ballard was the original soul of The Supremes, the powerhouse voice and grounding presence behind one of the most successful girl groups in American music history. Born Florence Glenda Ballard on June 30, 1943 in Detroit, Michigan. She grew up in a city where gospel, doo-wop, and Motown dreams lived on every corner. Florence's voice was rich and commanding, the kind of sound that could fill a room without a microphone. In the early days, when the Supremes were still struggling and performing in small venues, Florence was often viewed as the group's strongest singer and most natural performer. Alongside Diana Ross and Mary Wilson, she helped build the foundation of Motown's future empire, long before the fame, the gowns, and the television appearances. But as the group's success skyrocketed in the mid-1960s, so did internal tension. Motown's machine began pushing Diana Ross to the front, reshaping the Supremes' image and sound around her as the lead star. Florence, once a central force, was gradually sidelined, and the emotional toll was devastating. Behind the polished smiles, she struggled with depression, insecurity, and growing resentment over how her talent was being minimized. By 1967, the pressure reached a breaking point. Florence was removed from the group and replaced a decision that didn't just change her career, it shattered her identity. For a young black woman whose dreams were tied to music, being cut out of the spotlight felt like being erased in real time. Florence Ballard's life after the Supremes became a painful descent marked by financial hardship, unstable support, and worsening health. She tried to rebuild with solo projects, but the industry's doors didn't open as easily once she was no longer attached to the Supremes brand. The combination of stress, poverty, and emotional trauma weighed heavily. On February 22, 1976, Florence died in Detroit at only 32 years old, with reports linking her death to heart-related issues. Her passing stunned those who knew the truth. One of Motown's original jewels had been left behind. Florence Ballard's death remains one of the most tragic in music history, because it wasn't just a life lost, it was a talent discarded, a legacy interrupted, and a warning about how ruthless fame can be when an artist's value is decided by image instead of voice. Today, her story still echoes as one of the saddest what-ifs in black music history. Natina Reed Blake. Natina Reed was the kind of talent that felt built for a long career, sharp, energetic, and full of the bold confidence that defined early 2000s R&B. Born Natina Tijuana Reed on October 1, 1979 in New York City, and raised in Atlanta, she became one of the standout members of Block, the girl group discovered and championed by Lisa Left Eye Lopes of TLC. Black arrived at the perfect moment, combining slick harmonies with youthful attitude, and their debut album produced major hits like 808 and Bring It All to Me, helping them earn platinum-level visibility and a strong fan base. Natina stood out with her tough edge and magnetic presence, adding a street-smart flavor to the group's polished sound. To fans, she wasn't just part of a trio, she was the spark that made Block feel fearless. But behind the music, her life became increasingly complicated. As Block's momentum slowed in the changing industry, Natina's struggles began making headlines more than her talent. Over time, she faced legal troubles and personal instability, the kind of turbulence that can quietly pull a rising star away from the future they once had in their hands. Even when she tried to return to music, the road back was never simple. The public often sees fame as security, but for many artists, once the spotlight dims, support disappears, and that's when life can become the most dangerous. Natina's story reflected that harsh reality, a woman who once stood on major stages, now navigating a world that felt far less forgiving. Then, her life ended in a way that felt brutally sudden. On October 26, 2012, Natina Reed was killed in a car accident in Georgia just days after her 33rd birthday. Reports stated she was struck while in the roadway, and the tragedy shocked fans who still remembered her as that vibrant young star from Block's peak years. Her death hit especially hard because it came when so many believed she still had time to rebuild and return. Instead, the story closed early, not with a comeback album or a second act, but with silence. Natina Reed remains one of the most tragic losses in modern R&B because her journey shows how quickly things can shift, from bright promise and mainstream success to struggle, isolation, and an ending no one expected. Even years later, her name still carries the sting of unfinished potential, a reminder that behind the catchy hooks and glamorous images are real lives, fragile and human, moving one heartbeat at a time. Traci Braxton. Traci Braxton lived in a spotlight that was both a blessing and a burden. A talented voice searching for her own place inside a famous family legacy. Born Traci Renee Braxton on April 2, 1971 in Severn, Maryland, she grew up singing with her sisters in church long before the world knew the Braxton name. In the late 1980s, she was originally part of the Braxtons, the early group that included Tony Tawanda, Trina Tamar, and Traci. But as the years passed and the music industry shifted directions, Traci's path took a painful turn. While her sisters moved forward into mainstream fame, Traci was left behind during a key contract period, a separation that became a quiet heartbreak in her story. For many fans, her voice felt like the missing piece, the sister who carried talent, but didn't receive the same runway to fly. Years later, Traci found a different kind of recognition through television. As a central figure on Braxton Family Values, she became beloved for her honesty, humor, and emotional openness. Viewers didn't just see a celebrity. They saw a real woman wrestling with family dynamics, self-esteem, and the desire to finally be seen for herself, not just as Tony's sister. Traci eventually returned to music on her own terms, releasing her solo album Crash and Burn in 2014, and proving she still had the voice, the spirit, and the hunger. She also explored acting and continued building her personal brand, showing audiences a steady second act, not loud, but meaningful. Her journey resonated with older viewers because it felt familiar, the fight to reclaim your dreams after life takes an unexpected detour. Then tragedy arrived quietly, the kind that doesn't come with warning sirens, only heavy silence. Traci Braxton died on March 12, 2022, at 50 years old after battling esophageal cancer. Her death sent shockwaves through fans and the entertainment world because she had spent so many years rebuilding momentum and finally stepping into her own light. In the aftermath, tributes poured in not just for her talent, but for her resilience. Tracy's story remains one of the most tragic losses in modern Black entertainment because her life represented persistence, the belief that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. She didn't get to finish her next chapter, but the chapter she did write was powerful. A woman who refused to disappear, who fought for her voice, and who reminded the world that being the overlooked one doesn't mean being unimportant. Her legacy is love, courage, and the quiet strength to keep going even when the world counts you out. D'Angelo. D'Angelo. Real name: Michael Eugene Archer. Born February 11, 1974, is one of the most important icons of neo-soul, a man who redefined R&B with a style that was both classic and audacious. He emerged from Richmond, Virginia with a church background and then exploded onto the scene in the mid-1990s as a rare artist, singer, songwriter, producer, and multi-instrumentalist. His album Brown Sugar, 1995, was not only a success, but also platinum certified, and is considered one of the birthplaces of neo-soul. With Voodoo 2000, D'Angelo reached his peak. His debut album reached #1 on the Billboard 200, won a Grammy for Best R&B Album, and his hit, Untitled How Does It Feel, became a cultural icon of the era. But the greatest tragedy didn't come from the stage, it came from within. After Voodoo, Wikipedia notes that D'Angelo became increasingly uncomfortable with the sex symbol image, then spiraled into a series of personal crises, including depression, drug and alcohol addiction, causing him to almost disappear from the spotlight for years. When he returned with Black Messiah 2014, it wasn't just an album, it was a sign of survival. This project achieved outstanding success, winning the Grammy for Best R&B Album, and helped him prove he was still an artist with weight, not a forgotten memory. But fate was cruel. According to Wikipedia, while working on his fourth album, D'Angelo passed away on October 14, 2025 in New York City at the age of 51 from pancreatic cancer. It's a heartbreaking ending because he was the man who made the world love R&B in a new way. When D'Angelo passed away, it wasn't just the loss of a voice, but the loss of a school of thought, an artistic soul that inspired generations to come. Michael K. Williams. Michael K. Williams carried a rare kind of presence, the type that didn't just entertain you, it haunted you. Born Michael Kenneth Williams on November 22, 1966, in Brooklyn, New York, he didn't take the traditional Hollywood path. He came up through dance performing as a backup dancer and choreographer before a single unforgettable moment changed his life. His appearance in the Notorious B.I.G.'s Juicy video helped open doors, and soon he was acting with a natural intensity that couldn't be taught. But it was his role as Omar Little on HBO's The Wire that made him legendary. Omar wasn't just a character, he became a symbol, a street outlaw with a moral code, a figure both feared and oddly admired. Williams gave Omar depth, vulnerability, and menace, creating one of the greatest performances in television history. As his career grew, Michael became one of the most respected actors of his era. He brought that same raw authenticity to Boardwalk Empire as Chalky White, and later delivered powerful work in projects like Lovecraft Country, earning major award recognition. What made him different was his honesty. His face told stories before he even spoke. But behind that brilliance was a lifelong battle he never fully hid. Michael openly discussed his struggle with substance addiction, describing it as a war that followed him even through success. He wasn't just acting out pain, he understood it. That's why his performances felt so real to audiences, especially older viewers, who recognize what it looks like when someone is trying to survive their own history. Then his story ended in the most heartbreaking way. On September 6, 2021, Michael K. Williams was found dead in his Brooklyn apartment at 54 years old. Authorities later linked his death to a drug overdose, a tragic reminder that addiction doesn't care about talent, fame, or respect. The news hit Hollywood and fans like a gut punch because Williams wasn't just a star, he was a craftsman, a man who had fought hard to rebuild his life and used his platform to speak about recovery. His death felt especially painful because it wasn't a long decline in public view. It was sudden, quiet, and final. Michael K. Williams leaves behind unforgettable roles that changed modern television, but his passing remains one of the era's most tragic losses. A brilliant soul who gave the world art that felt like truth, only to be taken by a battle he never stopped fighting. Lance Reddick. Lance Reddick was the kind of actor who didn't need to shout to command the room. His presence was the power. Born Lance Solomon Reddick on June 7, 1962, in Baltimore, Maryland, he built a career on precision intelligence and quiet intensity. To many fans, he became unforgettable as Lieutenant Cedric Daniels in The Wire, playing a man trying to keep order inside a system that was already breaking. Later, he carried that same authority into roles like Philip Broyles on Fringe, and into the film world as Karen, the calm, loyal concierge in the John Wick franchise, a character who somehow made stillness feel dangerous. What made Lance special wasn't just talent, it was dignity. Even when he played stern characters, there was always something human underneath patience, restraint, and a sense of unseen emotion. He wasn't chasing celebrity, he was building legacy. He also became beloved to a whole different audience as the voice of Commander Zavala in Destiny, where fans treated him like more than a character, almost like a leader they trusted. When he showed up on screen, the temperature of the scene changed because you knew the moment mattered. Then the world lost him far too suddenly. Lance Reddick died on March 17, 2023 at age 60 at his home in Studio City, Los Angeles. The coroner listed coronary artery disease and atherosclerotic heart disease as the cause, though his attorney publicly disputed that finding. The shock wasn't just that he was gone, it was how fast it happened, right? As his work was still reaching new heights. His death left a silence in Hollywood that's hard to replace. A rare actor who made every project stronger simply by standing in the frame. Lance Reddick didn't just play authority, he embodied it. And that's why his passing still feels unreal. Tommy "Tiny" Lister. Tommy "Tiny" Lister was the kind of presence you couldn't ignore, a giant on screen, but often remembered off-screen as a man with warmth, humor, and heart. Born Thomas Duane Lister Jr. on June 24, 1958 in Compton, California, he was blind in one eye from childhood, yet nothing about his life followed a small path. Before Hollywood, he made his mark in athletics and wrestling, and that physical strength became part of his signature. But it was acting where Tiny became unforgettable. Many fans first fell in love with him as Debo in the classic comedy Friday 1995, The Neighborhood Bully, who was terrifying one second and hilarious the next. He went on to appear in films like The Fifth Element, Austin Powers, and countless TV roles, carving out a career that made him instantly recognizable across generations. What made Tiny special wasn't just his size, it was the way he used it. He could play intimidating characters, but he also brought personality, timing, and an almost cartoon-like charm that made audiences enjoy him even when he was the villain. Over the years, he became a pop culture staple. Someone older viewers remembered from theaters and younger fans discovered through reruns and clips online. He kept working steadily, staying connected to his audience and always feeling like a familiar face in black entertainment. In an industry that can discard people quickly, Tiny maintained relevance for decades simply by being unforgettable at what he did. Then came the sudden ending that shocked fans. Tommy "Tiny" Lister died on December 10, 2020 at 62 years old. His death was especially heartbreaking because it came without warning. For most people, one moment he was still part of the culture and the next he was gone. Reports later connected his passing to health complications, and the news left a wave of sadness across social media, especially among fans of Friday, where Debo had become a legendary character. Tiny's death remains tragic because he represented something rare, a working actor who became iconic without needing to be the lead. He gave people laughter, fear, and nostalgia all at once, and his absence left a hole in the world of black comedy and film that still feels personal. Even now, his legacy lives on every time someone quotes Friday or sees his face and instantly smiles. Charlie Murphy. Charlie Murphy had a gift that couldn't be manufactured. He could tell a story so vividly, you felt like you were standing in the room watching it happen. Born Charles Quentin Murphy on July 12, 1959 in Brooklyn, New York, he was the older brother of Eddie Murphy. But Charlie built his own legacy through a different kind of power: sharp, comedic Truth Street wisdom and fearless honesty. He first gained major attention through Chappelle's Show, where his legendary True Hollywood Stories sketches, especially the unforgettable tales involving Rick James and Prince, became instant classics. Charlie's delivery was so natural, so deadpan, and so authentic that audiences didn't just laugh. They believed him. He made comedy feel like confession. But Charlie's life wasn't only jokes. Before fame, he served in the U.S. Navy and later worked behind the scenes in entertainment, including writing and acting. Over time, he became a familiar face in films and TV, appearing in projects like CB4 and later showing up in series such as The Boondocks as the voice of Ed Wunkler III in Power, where he proved he could bring intensity as well as humor. Charlie represented that rare kind of entertainer who grows with the audience, someone older viewers respected because he felt real grounded and unafraid to speak plainly about life, fame, and survival. Then came the loss that hit fans like a gut punch. Charlie Murphy died on April 12, 2017 at 57 years old after battling leukemia. The news was heartbreaking because he still felt active, still felt like someone who had more stories left to tell. His passing reminded people that some of the brightest personalities can be fighting private battles in silence. Charlie Murphy's death remains one of the most tragic losses in comedy, because his voice was unique, not just funny, but honest in a way that made laughter feel like therapy. He left behind a legacy of unforgettable moments, quotable classics, and a style of storytelling that will never be duplicated. Even now, when fans replay those Chappelle's Show sketches, the laughter comes back fast. But the sadness follows right behind it. Paul Mooney. Paul Mooney was more than a comedian. He was a fearless truth-teller who used laughter like a blade. Born Paul Gladney on August 4, 1941 in Shreveport, Louisiana, he rose through the comedy world with a style that was sharp, unapologetic, and brutally honest about race power and hypocrisy in America. Paul didn't chase safe jokes. He challenged audiences, sometimes making them uncomfortable on purpose, because to him, comedy wasn't just entertainment, it was confrontation. Over the decades, he became a respected legend, known not only for his stand-up, but also for his work behind the scenes as a writer, helping shape groundbreaking comedy through collaborations connected to figures like Richard Pryor. To many fans, Paul Mooney became widely recognized through Chappelle's Show, where his appearances felt like moral lightning strikes, short segments packed with biting commentary and cultural truth. He also appeared in films like Bamboozled and became famous for the kind of lines people repeated for years because they sounded like uncomfortable facts dressed up as jokes. Paul's humor spoke directly to black audiences who were tired of coded language and polite lies. He sounded like the uncle at the cookout who sees everything clearly and refuses to sugarcoat it. That honesty made him a hero to many and a controversial figure to others. But either way, he was never ignored. Paul Mooney died on May 19, 2021 at 79 years old. His death marked the end of an era, a time when comedians weren't just performers, but public critics with the courage to say what others wouldn't. While he lived a long life, compared to many names on this tragic list, his passing still hit hard because voices like his are rare, and once they're gone, the culture feels quieter. Paul didn't just make people laugh, he made people reflect, argue, and rethink what they believed. His legacy remains in every comedian who dares to speak truth without apologizing, and in every audience member who remembers that sometimes the sharpest comedy isn't meant to comfort you, it's meant to wake you up. John Witherspoon. John Witherspoon was one of those rare entertainers who felt like family to America, the loud uncle, the hilarious neighbor, the no-nonsense dad who could roast you, love you, and make you laugh all in the same breath. Born John Witherspoon on January 27, 1942 in Detroit, Michigan, he came up through stand-up comedy in an era when black comedians had to fight for every stage, every spotlight, every chance to be seen. By the time he reached Hollywood, his voice and timing were unmistakable, fast, sharp, and packed with that old-school kitchen-table humor that older audiences instantly recognize. He didn't need fancy punchlines. His facial expressions, his tone, and his rhythm could carry an entire scene. To many fans, Witherspoon became immortal as Willie Jones in the Friday films, the father who stayed yelling, lecturing, and delivering one-liners that turned into everyday quotes. But his legacy went far beyond one franchise. He appeared in Boomerang House Party, The Wayans Bros, and countless sitcoms and films where he played father figures, mentors, or neighborhood legends. He also introduced himself to a younger generation as the voice of Granddad on The Boondocks, where his character became the loudest, funniest, most brutally honest voice in the room. Witherspoon had a gift. He could bring joy without needing controversy, and he could steal a scene without even raising his volume, though he usually did anyway. John Witherspoon died on October 29, 2019, at 77 years old. His death hit fans hard because he wasn't just a celebrity, he was comfort. He represented a time when comedy felt like community, when laughter sounded like your own relatives in the living room. Even though he lived a full life, his passing still felt tragic because voices like his don't get replaced. When Witherspoon left, it wasn't just a comedian gone, it was a whole style of black humor rooted in family struggle and survival. And every time you hear someone quote him, you realize the truth. John Witherspoon may be gone, but his laughter is still living in the culture. Ron Glass. Ron Glass was the definition of quiet greatness, an actor whose calm intelligence and smooth presence could elevate any scene without ever demanding attention. Born Ronald Earl Glass on July 10, 1945 in Evansville, Indiana, he trained his craft in theater before becoming a beloved face on television. Many audiences first fell in love with him as Detective Ron Harris on the classic sitcom Barney Miller, where his charm and subtle comedic timing made him stand out in a cast full of strong personalities. He had that rare skill of making a line funnier just by the way he looked at someone, and older viewers especially remember him as part of the golden era of TV that balanced humor with heart. But Ron Glass wasn't only a sitcom actor, he was incredibly versatile. In the 2000s, a whole new generation discovered him as Shepard Book on Firefly and later Serenity, where he played a spiritual man with hidden depth and mystery. That role proved something fans already knew: Ron could bring warmth, wisdom, and quiet authority all at once. Whether he was playing comedy, drama, or sci-fi, he carried an energy that felt safe, like the steady voice in the room when everyone else was losing control. He never needed flashy headlines to be unforgettable. His work spoke for him. Ron Glass died on November 25, 2016, at 71 years old from respiratory failure. His passing saddened fans across multiple generations because he represented a type of actor Hollywood doesn't celebrate enough: the consistent, reliable professional who helps make a show feel real. Ron's death was tragic, not because it was scandalous, but because it felt like losing a piece of television history, a man who gave viewers comfort, laughter, and wisdom for decades. Even now, when fans re-watch Barney Miller or Firefly, Ron Glass still feels present, like he never truly left. Merlin Santana. Merlin Santana's story is one of the most painful tragedies in black television history because he wasn't just talented, he was still becoming. Born Merlin Santana on March 14, 1976 in New York City, he started acting as a child and quickly became one of those young stars you could tell had real it. He wasn't just cute on camera, he had timing charm and a natural confidence that made him stand out in every scene. Many fans first noticed him in the early 1990s, but his biggest breakout came when he played Romeo Santana on The Steve Harvey Show. Romeo was funny, smooth, and full of energy, and Merlin played him so effortlessly that audiences felt like they were watching a future leading man being born in real time. As his career grew, Merlin showed range beyond sitcom comedy. He appeared in films like The Wood 1999, a beloved coming-of-age classic, and made guest appearances across popular TV. In a period when many young actors struggled to transition from child star to adult roles, Merlin seemed to be doing it the right way. Steady work, growing fan support, and more opportunities opening up. He was building a foundation, and for many viewers especially, those who watched him every week on TV, he felt like part of the family. You could sense that his best years weren't behind him, they were still ahead. Then his life ended in the most senseless way imaginable. On November 9, 2002, Merlin Santana was shot and killed in Los Angeles at just 26 years old. Reports connected his death to a cruel chain of lies and manipulation, a tragic, avoidable situation that spiraled into murder. The news devastated fans because there was no warning in his career arc, no slow decline, no farewell tour, no final goodbye. It was just gone. Merlin's death remains heartbreaking because it stole not only a life, but an entire future roles he never got to play movies. He never got to lead a grown man career. He never got to fully claim. And every time people rewatch The Steve Harvey Show or The Wood, the laughter hits. But it's always followed by the same painful thought: Merlin Santana should still be here. Thomas Mickle Ford. Thomas McCall Ford was one of those actors who made sitcom history feel real. The kind of talent who could deliver a joke, a life lesson, and a silent, emotional moment, all in the same scene. Born Thomas Michael Ford on September 5, 1964 in Los Angeles, California, he came up through theater and television with a steady determination that showed in every role he touched. But to millions of viewers, he will forever be remembered as Tommy Strawn on the classic 1990s sitcom, Martin. Tommy wasn't just Martin's best friend. He was the responsible one, the loyal one, the friend who held the crew together when chaos hit. Ford played him with charm, warmth, and that perfect mix of confidence and vulnerability that made audiences love him for years. What made Thomas stand out was how natural he felt. While sitcom characters can sometimes become cartoons, Tommy felt like a real person, the guy who tried to do things the right way, who stayed loyal and who still got roasted anyway. His chemistry with Martin Lawrence and the rest of the cast helped turn Martin into one of the most iconic black sitcoms of all time, a show that still lives through reruns, clips, and quotes decades later. After Martin, Ford continued acting in TV and film, and he also expanded into writing, speaking, and motivational work. Many people don't realize how much he cared about uplifting others, using his platform to talk about growth, purpose, and positivity, especially for young black men trying to navigate life with pride. Then came the shock that felt too sudden to believe. On October 12, 2016, Thomas McCall Ford died at 52 years old after suffering complications tied to a serious health crisis. The news hit fans like a punch because he still felt young, still felt active, still felt like a part of our living culture, not someone we were ready to memorialize. His death remains tragic because he wasn't just a nostalgic face from the past. He was a symbol of the 90s black TV era, and his presence carried comfort for generations who grew up watching him every week. When Thomas McCall Ford passed, it felt like another piece of that golden era disappeared with him. But his legacy remains powerful. Every time people rewatch Martin, laugh at Tommy's reactions, or quote the show's classic moments, they're keeping him alive, not as a memory, but as a permanent part of black television history. Erica Ashe. Erica Ashe's story hits differently because she wasn't a scandal headline, she was pure talent. A woman who made people laugh while secretly fighting for her life. Born Erica Chantal Ashe on September 19, 1977, she became known for her fearless comedy and sharp charisma, building a career across sketch sitcoms and film. Many fans remember her from MAD-TV, where she proved she could hold her own in fast-paced comedy, and later from Starz' Survivor's Remorse, where she showed real range beyond punchlines. She also appeared in projects like Real Husbands of Hollywood, and films including Scary Movie 5. Her gift was versatility. She could switch from hilarious to heartfelt in one scene and make it look effortless. But the most heartbreaking part of Erica's story wasn't what audiences saw, it was what she carried quietly. According to reports, she battled breast cancer, including a long fight that became part of her private reality while she continued working, showing up, and staying strong in public. That contrast is what makes her passing so tragic. People were laughing with her, not knowing how much pain she may have been managing behind the scenes. Erica Ashe passed away on July 28, 2024 in Los Angeles at just 46 years old. And for fans, it felt unfair because she still had momentum, still had life in her voice, still had more chapters left to write. Erica's legacy isn't just in the roles she played. It's in the joy she gave while quietly enduring a battle most people never fully understood. Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s death remains one of the most tragic and world-shifting losses in modern history because it wasn't just a man who was killed, it was a movement that was violently challenged in front of the entire world. Born January 15, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia, King rose as a Baptist minister whose words carried moral force and strategic clarity. He became the face of the civil rights movement, helping lead nonviolent protests that pushed America toward change, from the Montgomery bus boycott to the Birmingham campaign, and ultimately the 1963 March on Washington, where he delivered the immortal "I Have a Dream" speech. By 1964, he had become the youngest recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize at the time, recognized globally for confronting injustice through nonviolent resistance. But as his influence expanded, so did the threats, surveillance, and hatred surrounding him. By 1968, King's mission had widened beyond civil rights into economic justice and opposition to the Vietnam War positions that made him even more controversial to powerful forces. Then came the night that froze history. On April 4, 1968, while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, Dr. King was shot. He was only 39 years old. His death sparked national grief and unrest with waves of mourning and uprisings across many U.S. cities. The man who preached nonviolence was taken by violence, a brutal contradiction that still haunts American memory. King's assassination remains tragic not only because of how young he was, but because of what he represented: hope, discipline, and the belief that America could be morally transformed. Even today, questions and conspiracies still surround the case in the public imagination. But one truth is undeniable: his death turned him into a martyr and made his message even harder to ignore. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't just leave behind speeches. He left behind a blueprint for courage, and the pain of losing him reminds us that history's brightest lights often become targets precisely because they shine too clearly. Malcolm X. Malcolm X's death remains one of the most tragic and explosive turning points in Black history, because it wasn't just an assassination. It was a silencing of a man who was evolving in real time. Born Malcolm Little on May 19, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska, his early life was shaped by violence and instability. His father, an outspoken supporter of Black self-reliance, died under suspicious circumstances when Malcolm was still a child, and his family later fractured under poverty and trauma. As a young man, Malcolm fell into crime and was imprisoned, but that prison sentence became his transformation. Behind bars, he educated himself relentlessly, discovered the power of discipline, and joined the Nation of Islam, emerging with a new identity and a fierce mission. When he became Malcolm X, his speeches hit America like thunder, unapologetic, direct, and focused on Black dignity, self-defense, and liberation. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, Malcolm had become one of the most powerful and controversial Black voices in the country. He challenged white supremacy, openly criticized hypocrisy in American politics, and demanded Black people stop begging for acceptance and start claiming power. Unlike leaders who spoke softly, Malcolm spoke like a man trying to wake up a sleeping nation. But his rise also brought intense surveillance threats and tension, even within his own circles. In 1964, his public break with the Nation of Islam became one of the most dangerous moments of his life, placing him in a storm of political pressure and personal risk. That same year, his pilgrimage to Mecca reshaped parts of his worldview, and many believed he was entering a new phase, still fearless but broader, more global, and more strategic. Then came the fatal moment. On February 21, 1965, Malcolm X was assassinated while speaking at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, New York City. He was only 39 years old, the same age Martin Luther King Jr. would be when he was killed 3 years later. The attack was brutal and public, and the shockwaves spread instantly through Black America. His wife, Betty Shabazz, and his children were left to face a world that had just watched their protector fall in real time. Malcolm's death remains one of the most tragic losses because it happened right as he was changing, right as he was building new alliances, expanding his message, and stepping into a wider international mission. Malcolm X didn't die as a man fading out. He died as a man rising, and that's what makes his loss so haunting. His